He woke up before the sun rose, just as he did every day. The quiet of the morning always felt safe to him. The world still asleep. No noise, no movement, just the sound of wind brushing against the windows. He liked it that way. It reminded him of the calm before a mission, the silence that tested a soldier's patience and thoughts. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at the framed picture on the nightstand. It was old and slightly faded, but the memory behind it stayed alive. In that photo, he was standing in desert gear, dust covering his face, smiling for the first time in days. Beside him stood his dog, alert and proud, wearing a small vest with a flag patch. He reached out and touched the frame gently. "Morning, buddy," he whispered. Then from the hallway came the familiar sound of claws tapping the floor. A moment later, his German shepherd appeared, tail wagging, eyes bright, as if he already knew what was coming next. "Morning walk." He smiled softly. "You never forget, do you?" The dog barked once in response, as if saying, "Of course not." They went out together. The streets were quiet. Most people in the town didn't know who he really was. To them, he was just another man who liked to walk his dog early in the morning. Nobody knew that behind that calm face was someone who had served in the country's most secret and dangerous missions. He had been part of a team that never got named in newspapers or honored in public. He liked it that way. He didn't want attention. He wanted peace. The dog walked beside him without a leash. He didn't need one. They had been through everything together. Night raids, explosions, long waits in the desert where every sound could mean death. The dog understood commands that weren't spoken out loud. A glance was enough. When they reached the park, the man stopped and looked at the sky. The sun was climbing, golden light spreading slowly across the trees. The dog sat next to him, watching him closely. The man took a deep breath. "You like it here, don't you?" The dog barked once and then ran to chase a falling leaf. The man chuckled quietly. For a few minutes, life was peaceful. It was almost easy to forget everything that had come before. The chaos, the loss, the people he couldn't save. When they got home, he filled the dog's bowl and poured himself a cup of coffee. He looked around the small kitchen. Everything was simple. No decorations, no pictures except for the one on the nightstand. The walls were plain, the furniture old. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him. He often thought about how life had changed after retirement. For years he lived in places where every minute mattered. One mistake could end everything. Now he had quiet mornings, friendly neighbors, and long walks with the only partner he truly trusted. The dog, named Rex, had also served beside him. Most people assumed he was just a pet, but Rex had once been part of something far greater. He had been trained to detect explosives, track wounded soldiers, and even sense danger before anyone else could. He was more than a dog. He was family, a soldier, and a hero in his own right. The man had adopted Rex after leaving the military. They had been through too much together to part ways. In many ways, Rex had helped him stay grounded. On nights when memories kept him awake, Rex would lie beside the bed, quietly watching him as if protecting him from the ghosts of his past. That day, everything seemed normal. The man spent his morning repairing the fence in the backyard, while Rex played near the garden. The weather was mild, the air soft. There was no sign that anything would go wrong. While working, he didn't notice that the gate hadn't latched properly. Rex, curious and alert as always, saw a squirrel run by and followed it. The gate opened just enough for him to slip through. He trotted down the path, tail wagging, completely unaware of the trouble waiting for him. The man was inside the shed when it happened. He didn't hear the first car stop down the road. He didn't see the woman across the street who pulled out her phone, her voice shaky as she said, "There's a big dog running loose. I think it's dangerous." She didn't know that Rex was harmless. She didn't know that the dog had once saved more people than most humans ever would. Within minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The officers got out, scanning the area. They saw Rex standing near the corner, looking around for his owner. He wasn't growling, just watching. But to someone who didn't understand dogs or fear, his size and stance might have looked threatening. One of the officers called out, "Hey, come here." His voice was sharp. Rex froze, unsure of what was happening. The other officer stepped closer, hand near his holster. At that exact moment, the man inside the shed heard the faint sound of engines and voices. He wiped his hands and stepped out, confused. "Rex?" he called. No answer, his heart sank. He hurried toward the gate, realizing it was open. Meanwhile, the officers moved closer to Rex. The dog backed up slightly, tail low, sensing tension. One of the officers raised his voice again.
"Stay back!"
Rex barked once, not out of anger, but confusion. To him, this was just noise and strangers shouting. He wanted to go home. Then it happened in an instant. One sharp movement, one loud sound that tore the air apart. The man heard the gunshot before he saw anything. His chest tightened and he ran faster than he had in years. When he turned the corner, he saw his dog lying on the ground. For a moment, the world stopped. He dropped to his knees beside Rex. No, no, no. His hands trembled as he touched the dog's fur, still warm. Rex's eyes looked at him for a second. Trusting, calm, and then... Still, the officers stood frozen. One of them lowered his gun, realizing too late what he had done. "Sir, please step back," the other said nervously. But the man didn't move. He couldn't hear them. He couldn't see anything but Rex. People started gathering. Someone recorded the scene on their phone. The man's heart felt heavy, but his face showed no anger, only deep, quiet pain. Years of military discipline held him together. He picked up Rex gently, ignoring the officer's words, and walked back toward his home. The neighborhood watched in silence. No one knew what to say. Inside the house, he laid Rex down on his blanket near the fireplace. He sat beside him, not crying, not speaking, just sitting. The house felt colder than before. The world outside kept moving, but for him, everything had stopped. Hours passed. Evening fell. He still sat there, his hand resting on Rex's paw. The same hand that once held weapons in war now trembled over the loss of his only friend. He thought about the years they had shared. The missions, the long nights, the times Rex had saved him from walking into danger. He remembered one night in a faraway desert when Rex had barked once, just once, and saved the entire team from an ambush. That dog had saved lives, and now his life had ended not in a battlefield, but on a quiet street because someone got scared. When night came, he finally stood up. He walked to the small box under the window where he kept his medals and folded uniform. He opened it and looked at the patches, the badges, the memories. He picked up one, his Delta Force insignia, and stared at it for a long time. Then he whispered softly, "You did your duty, buddy," more than anyone ever knew. He placed the insignia beside Rex's collar. Later that night, rain began to fall. It tapped against the windows, soft but steady. He sat near the window, watching it blur the streetlights. For the first time in years, he felt truly alone. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood there, different ones from the day before. One of them spoke quietly. "Sir, we came to offer our apologies. It was an accident." The man looked at them for a moment, then nodded once. His eyes were calm, unreadable. "I understand," he said softly. The officers didn't know who he was. They didn't know they had taken the partner of an elite soldier, a man who had led missions that would never appear in public records. To them, he was just a quiet man mourning a pet. When they left, he closed the door slowly. The silence returned. That day, he buried Rex under the big oak tree in the backyard. He placed a small wooden marker on the spot and wrote only one line, "Rex, my brother." He sat there for hours. The wind moved through the leaves, and somewhere in that sound, he almost thought he heard Rex's bark again. The world outside didn't know. The town went back to normal. But for him, nothing would ever be normal again. The bond between a soldier and his dog was something few could understand. It wasn't just about loyalty. It was about trust built in places where trust meant survival. As he sat there, he thought about the meaning of service. He had given years of his life to protect strangers, to bring peace where there was none. And yet peace had taken away the one being who had protected him. He didn't speak about it to anyone. He didn't post online or go to the news. He simply stayed quiet, carrying the memory of Rex like another mission. One more promise to keep. That night, before sleeping, he looked at the empty spot by his bed. He whispered, "You did good, boy. Rest easy now." The house fell quiet again, but in his heart he knew Rex would never truly be gone. Some bonds don't end even when one side disappears. They just live quietly, waiting for the day they'll meet again. Outside, the rain stopped and the first light of morning began to appear. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, and for a moment he smiled faintly. "We'll walk again someday," he said softly. Then he turned away from the window, ready to face another day alone. The morning after burying Rex, the house felt emptier than ever. He woke up at the usual time, but there was no sound of paws on the floor, no soft bark reminding him it was time for their walk. The silence felt heavy, pressing against the walls. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at the small patch of sunlight spilling across the floor where Rex used to sleep. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like getting up. He had always believed he could live through anything. He'd faced loss before. He'd watched brothers in arms fall beside him, held the hands of those who didn't make it home. But this felt different. Those moments happened in war, far away from peace. This happened here in the place he thought was safe. After a while, he got up and walked into the kitchen. The dog bowl was still on the floor, half filled with food from the day before. He stood there quietly, then picked it up and placed it in the cupboard. It felt wrong to leave it there, but even more wrong to throw it away. He made himself a cup of coffee, but it didn't taste right. Nothing did. Later that morning, he stepped outside. The sky was clear and the world looked as normal as ever. Cars passed by, kids went to school, neighbors watered their lawns. Nobody mentioned what had happened. A few people gave him sympathetic glances, but no one came close. Maybe they didn't know what to say, or maybe they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. He didn't blame them. He walked to the spot under the oak tree where he had buried Rex. The soil was still soft, dark against the grass. He sat down beside it, resting his hand on the small wooden marker. The word brother stared back at him. Simple, but it said everything. A memory drifted into his mind, one from years ago. It was night in a faraway desert. His team had been pinned down, surrounded, and they couldn't see where the danger was coming from. The only sound they heard was the wind sweeping through the dunes. Then, without being told, Rex moved forward, nose to the ground. Within minutes, he stopped, ears up, body still. That moment saved their lives. The enemy had buried explosives just a few steps ahead. Because of Rex, they avoided it. He smiled faintly, remembering how everyone had patted Rex's back afterward, calling him the smartest soldier in the unit. Even back then, Rex didn't care about praise. He only looked up at his handler, waiting for the next signal, always ready to serve. That same loyalty was what broke his heart now. He whispered softly, "You never failed me, not once." As the day went on, a few people stopped by his house. One of them was the neighbor who had made the call that led to the shooting. She looked nervous, holding a small box of cookies. Her voice trembled when she spoke. I didn't know. I just thought he was dangerous. I'm so sorry." He looked at her, tired but calm. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You couldn't have known." She looked down, tears in her eyes. "He was a good dog, wasn't he?" "The best," he replied. She nodded, left the box on the porch, and walked away without saying another word. He didn't touch the cookies. He knew she meant well, but no apology could bring back what was gone. That night he couldn't sleep. Every sound reminded him of Rex. The creak of the floor, the wind outside, even the ticking of the clock. He turned on the small lamp beside his bed and reached for the box that held his old military things. Slowly he went through each item: his watch from deployment, his dog tags, a folded letter from a friend who never made it back. At the bottom was Rex's service patch. He held it tightly, tracing the edges with his thumb. He thought about how people saw dogs like Rex as just animals. But to soldiers, they were more than that. They were partners who didn't judge, didn't ask questions, didn't quit. When humans grew afraid, these dogs stood tall. They carried the same risks, shared the same fears, and yet never hesitated. He wondered if the police officers understood that. Probably not. To them, it was just another call, another moment of panic. But to him, it was everything. 2 days later, someone knocked on his door again. This time it was a man in uniform, not a police officer, but a veteran from a nearby base. He had heard about what happened through other soldiers. "We wanted to come pay our respects," he said. Behind him were 3 others, all dressed in simple clothes but carrying themselves like men who had seen too much. They brought with them a folded flag and a framed picture of Rex in uniform taken years ago. One of them placed the flag gently on the table. "He deserves this," the man said. "He was one of us." For the first time since the incident, the retired soldier felt something inside him shift. Not happiness, but warmth. The kind that comes when someone understands without needing words. They sat together for hours, sharing stories. Some funny, some painful. They laughed, remembering how Rex once stole a sandwich during a long mission and refused to give it back until everyone shared a bite. They fell silent when talking about missions that ended differently, ones no one liked to remember. Before leaving, one of them said quietly, "You're not alone, brother." After they left, the house didn't feel quite as empty. A few days later, news of the shooting began to spread beyond the town. Someone from the neighborhood had posted a short video online. The moment the shot rang out, followed by a clip of the man carrying Rex home in silence. The video went viral. People wanted to know who he was, who the dog was, and why this had happened. At first, he didn't care. He avoided calls, ignored messages. He didn't want attention. He just wanted peace. But then a reporter came to his door, respectful and quiet. "Sir," she said, "people are saying you're a former Delta Force commander. Is that true?" He didn't answer right away. He looked past her toward the oak tree. "Some things don't need to be discussed," he said simply. She nodded, understanding the weight in his voice. Can I at least tell his story? The dog's story? He thought about it. Rex had never cared about fame, but maybe his story could help people understand not just about loyalty, but about responsibility and compassion. "If you do," he said, "make sure they know he was more than a dog. He was a soldier." Within days, the story appeared everywhere. Decorated war dog wrongfully killed by police. Former elite commander's tragic loss sparks debate. The headlines spread fast, and people all over the country reacted with anger and sadness. Veterans reached out, sharing stories of their own service dogs. Some wrote letters, others sent flowers, and a few even visited, quietly leaving medals or photos at the foot of the oak tree. The police department released a formal apology. The officer involved was placed under review. They called it a tragic mistake, but for the man, none of it mattered. Mistake or not, Rex was gone. He appreciated the kindness from strangers, but deep inside, he still felt hollow. He spent his days quietly, mostly outside near the tree. Sometimes children from the neighborhood would come by to ask about the dog. Was he really a hero? One of them asked. He smiled gently. "Yes," he said. "He saved people who never even knew his name." The child tilted his head. "Then he's still here, right?" The man looked at the ground for a long time, then nodded slowly. "In a way, yes. He'll always be here." That night, he sat at his kitchen table writing something in a small notebook. It wasn't a diary. He didn't believe in writing about feelings, but this time he wanted to remember every detail. The moment they met, their first mission together. The bond they built over years of trust. He wrote about the time Rex had been injured during a rescue, how he had carried him through rough terrain under fire, refusing to leave him behind. He wrote about the nights when nightmares woke him up, and Rex would rest his head on his chest, reminding him he was safe. When he finished, he closed the notebook and placed it next to Rex's collar on the shelf. "That's our story," he said softly. Weeks passed. The noise around the story began to fade as new events took its place in the news cycle. But for him, life continued at the same slow pace. Every morning he still woke up early, still looked at the spot where Rex used to sleep, and still took a walk, alone this time. One morning, while walking down the quiet street, he noticed another man sitting on a bench with a young Labrador puppy. The man looked tired, eyes shadowed, hands trembling slightly. He recognized that look. He had seen it many times in the mirror. He stopped and said gently, "First dog?" The man nodded. "Yeah, I just got him from a shelter. Trying to keep my mind busy. Veteran?" he asked softly. The man nodded again. "Marine Corps. Been out for a year. It's hard," he smiled faintly. "Yeah, it is." He looked at the puppy, wagging its tail, eyes full of curiosity. "He'll help you more than you think." The man on the bench looked up, curious. "You think so?" "I know so," he said quietly. That small moment planted a thought in his mind. Maybe Rex's story didn't have to end with loss. Maybe it could become the start of something that helped others like him. People who had seen too much, felt too much, and needed someone to guide them back to life. That evening, he made a call to an old friend who worked with veterans programs. "I want to start something," he said. "A place where we train rescue dogs to help soldiers adjust when they come home." His friend paused. "That's a beautiful idea. What will you call it?" He looked at the framed picture of Rex on his wall and smiled softly. "I'll call it the Second Chance Project. Because everyone deserves one, even us." When he hung up for the first time in months, he felt a quiet strength return to his chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close, a reason to keep going. He stepped outside again that night, looked up at the stars and whispered, "We're not done yet, buddy, not by a long shot." And in the stillness of that quiet evening, he almost thought he heard a soft bark in the distance, carried by the wind, gentle but certain, like a promise that the bond they shared would never fade. The days after he decided to start the project passed in quiet determination. He hadn't felt that kind of focus in years. It reminded him of the planning days before a mission, careful, patient, with every step mapped out in his head. Only this time, the mission wasn't about survival. It was about healing. He began by clearing out the old barn behind his house. Dust filled the air, sunlight cutting through the open windows like thin blades. He swept the floors, repaired the broken doors, and fixed the loose boards one by one. As he worked, memories came and went. Rex running through the yard, barking at birds, sitting proudly when called. The sound of his tools almost felt like music, keeping him company. Neighbors noticed the change. The same man who once kept to himself was now outside every day, building, cleaning, and talking to people who stopped by. Some asked what he was doing. He simply said, "Something that matters." After a few weeks, the barn looked different. Clean, open, ready for something new. He placed a simple wooden sign on the door. It read, "The Second Chance Project." Below it, in smaller letters, "For soldiers and dogs who need each other." The first time he saw that sign, a small smile touched his face. It was quiet but honest. He called his old friend from the veterans program again. "It's ready," he said. "That's fast," his friend laughed. "You always did work like the clock was running out." He chuckled softly. "Can't help it." They arranged for a few veterans to visit, along with some rescue dogs from a nearby shelter. When the first truck arrived, his chest tightened slightly. The sight of the cages, the nervous eyes of the dogs, brought a wave of emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. He remembered the day he first met Rex, how wary the dog had been, how quickly they learned to trust each other. A young shelter worker helped unload the dogs. "Most of these have been through rough situations," she said quietly. "Some were abandoned. Some were hurt. They'll need patience," he nodded. "That we have plenty of." The first group of veterans arrived the next morning. 4 men, 1 woman, all different ages, all carrying the same look in their eyes, tired, guarded, and searching for something they couldn't name. He welcomed them with a firm handshake and calm voice. "This place is yours as much as mine," he said. They started slowly. The first few days weren't easy. Some of the dogs barked too much, some hid in corners. One refused to eat unless someone sat beside it. The veterans, too, had their struggles. Some avoided eye contact, some flinched at sudden noises. He saw himself in them, the way they carried invisible weight. He paired each veteran with a dog, not randomly but instinctively. He could see who needed what kind of companion. A quiet man got a gentle Labrador. A restless woman was matched with a playful shepherd mix. And one young veteran who had lost a leg in service was paired with a small brown dog that limped from an old injury. They seemed to understand each other instantly. As the days passed, he watched small miracles unfold. The dogs that once shook with fear began to wag their tails. The veterans who barely spoke started laughing. They walked together, trained together, and learned from one another. The project was working. Sometimes he stood by the fence watching them. The wind would move through the trees, carrying the sound of laughter and barking. For the first time since losing Rex, he felt peace that didn't hurt. But not every day was easy. Some nights the memories still came back, loud and sudden like distant thunder. On those nights, he'd go out to the oak tree and sit beside Rex's resting place. "We're doing it, buddy," he'd whisper. "You're still helping people." Word about the project started spreading quietly through veteran circles. People came from nearby towns to visit, some to volunteer, others just to watch. A few local reporters showed up, but he always asked them to focus on the program, not on him. "This isn't my story," he said. "It's theirs." One afternoon, a car pulled up to the house. A woman stepped out wearing a police uniform. She stood there awkwardly, hat in her hands, until he noticed her. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked over. "Can I help you?" he asked. She hesitated. "I'm from the department," she said softly. "Not the same officers from before. I just wanted to come here myself, to say how sorry we all are." What happened shouldn't have happened. He looked at her for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Then he nodded. I appreciate that, he said calmly. She looked around the yard at the dogs playing with the veterans. You've turned something terrible into something good, she said quietly. Most people wouldn't, he shrugged slightly. You don't fix pain by hiding from it, he replied. You fix it by giving it purpose. Before she left, she handed him a small envelope. Inside was a note signed by her department and a donation for the project. We wanted to help, she said. He accepted it with a simple thank you. That evening, he sat outside again. The sunset painted the sky orange and red. He felt a kind of calm he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from creating something new out of the broken pieces. Weeks turned into months. The Second Chance project grew slowly but steadily. New fences were built, kennels added, training grounds expanded. The veterans took part in everything, building, cleaning, teaching. They weren't just participants anymore. They were a team. Every morning started with the same ritual. He'd ring a small bell near the barn and everyone would gather. They'd share a few words, plan the day, and end with a simple promise. We take care of them and they take care of us. One morning as they gathered, one of the veterans spoke up. You ever think about getting another dog for yourself? The man asked. He smiled faintly. I think about it, he said. But some bonds can't be replaced. You just carry them with you. The veteran nodded, understanding. Still, he said, maybe Rex would want you to. He didn't answer right away, but the thought stayed with him all day. That afternoon, a volunteer from the shelter arrived with a new group of dogs. Among them was a black shepherd with cautious eyes. The moment their gazes met, something stirred inside him. The dog looked familiar in ways he couldn't explain. Alert, steady but gentle. He walked closer and the dog didn't back away. What's his name? He asked. Shadow, the volunteer said. He's been hard to place. Doesn't trust easily. He crouched down, speaking softly. Hey there, Shadow. The dog tilted its head, watching him closely. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then the dog took a small step forward and rested its nose on his hand. A quiet warmth filled his chest. He smiled. Welcome home, he whispered. From that day on, Shadow followed him everywhere. Not to replace Rex, but to continue what Rex had started. The other veterans noticed the change in him. He smiled more, spoke more freely. Even the way he carried himself seemed lighter. One evening, as he trained Shadow near the field, the young veteran with the prosthetic leg came over. He listens to you, the young man said. How do you do it? He smiled softly. You don't make them listen, he said. You make them trust. That's the secret, the young man nodded, thinking deeply. I think that's what we're all learning here, he said quietly. The project became more than a training center. It became a community, a family built from broken pieces that somehow fit together. The veterans who once avoided people now mentored newcomers. The dogs who once hid from touch now ran freely. Hope had returned to a place that once felt lifeless. One evening after everyone had gone home, he sat by the oak tree again. The wind rustled through the branches and the sound felt comforting. Shadow lay beside him, head resting on his knee. He looked up at the stars and said softly, We did it, buddy. You'd be proud. Somewhere deep inside, he could almost feel Rex's presence, like a quiet heartbeat in the wind, reminding him that love and loyalty never die. They just change form. He thought about how strange life was. One mistake had caused so much pain, yet from that pain came something that saved lives, even if in small ways. Maybe that was the point, to turn suffering into strength. The following week, a local newspaper wrote an article titled, From Loss to Healing, the Soldier Who Built Hope. They visited the project, spoke to the veterans, watched the training sessions. When they asked to photograph him, he agreed only if Shadow and the team were in the picture too. This isn't about me, he said. It's about what we've all built together. When the article was published, letters began arriving from across the country. People offered donations, shared their own stories of loss and recovery. Some wrote to say that reading about Rex and the project gave them courage to face their own pain. He read every letter slowly, feeling humbled. He kept them all in a small wooden box beside the flag and Rex's collar. Sometimes, late at night, he'd open that box and read one or two. One letter stood out. A child had written in crayon, Thank you for helping the dogs and the soldiers. I think Rex is smiling. He smiled through tears when he read that one. Children had a way of saying the truth in the simplest words. The project continued to grow. The barn became a full center with training grounds, sleeping quarters, and a small memorial corner with a photo of Rex and a plaque that read, "The first to serve, the reason we started." Every newcomer stopped there before their first session. It became a quiet tradition. Sometimes, when the air was still and the fields were silent except for the sound of dogs breathing softly, he felt something inside settle, like a storm finally calming down. He realized that the grief he carried would never vanish, but it had changed shape. It had turned into purpose. As the sun dipped low one evening, painting the sky gold, he looked around at the people and animals around him. Laughter, movement, peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for him, that was enough. He whispered under his breath, "Rest easy, old friend. We're still walking your path." Shadow lifted his head, ears twitching as if he understood. The man smiled and reached down to pat him. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go home." They walked back toward the barn together, the sky fading into night, the air cool and calm. Behind them, the oak tree stood tall, leaves whispering quietly in the wind, like a memory that would never fade, a promise that would never be broken. The morning sun rose quietly over the fields, painting everything in shades of gold. The sound of dogs barking softly mixed with the laughter of the veterans as they began their day. He stood by the barn door, coffee in hand, watching it all unfold. It had become a routine, one that filled the emptiness he once thought would never go away. Shadow walked beside him, calm and alert, always keeping an eye on everyone. The dog had grown more confident over the months, and wherever he went, the veterans followed with smiles. They all seemed to love Shadow, not just because of his intelligence, but because of how gentle he was with everyone, especially the ones who still struggled to open up. After the morning walk, he gathered everyone near the training field. "We've been talking about expanding," he said. "There's more land behind the hill, about 5 acres. I was thinking we could build a proper agility course there, give the dogs and us more space to train." The group nodded, a mix of excitement and determination on their faces. One of the veterans spoke up. "We can help build it. We've got the tools, and working with our hands beats sitting around any day." He smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." The days that followed were full of work. The group cut wood, measured ground, and built fences. There was laughter, sweat, and the smell of fresh earth. For many of them, it was more than just construction. It was therapy. Every nail they hammered in felt like a piece of their own lives being rebuilt. During lunch breaks, they'd sit under the big oak tree, eating sandwiches and talking about everything and nothing. Some shared stories from their service days, while others spoke about families they hadn't seen in years. He didn't talk much about his past, but when he did, everyone listened. His voice carried quiet strength, the kind that comes from pain turned into wisdom. One afternoon, while fixing one of the new fences, he noticed a car parked near the edge of the property. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a plain jacket, looking around with curiosity. He walked over, cautious but polite. "Can I help you?" he asked. The stranger smiled faintly. "I hope so. I read about your project. I'm with a local organization that helps veterans reintegrate into civilian life. We're always looking for people making real change. What you've built here, it's inspiring." He wiped his hands and nodded. "We're just doing what needs to be done. These folks deserve a chance to heal, and so do the dogs." The man's eyes softened. "Would you mind if I brought a few of our members here next week? Maybe we can learn from what you're doing." "Of course," he said. "The more people this helps, the better." The following week, several visitors arrived, some from the organization, some journalists, and a few donors who had read about the Second Chance project. The veterans seemed nervous at first, but once the dogs started showing off their new tricks, everyone relaxed. One of the visitors, an older woman with kind eyes, watched closely as a veteran guided a dog through the new obstacle course. When the dog finished, tail wagging and tongue hanging out, she clapped with genuine joy. She turned to him and said, "You've created something powerful here. It's not just training, it's rebuilding souls." He smiled quietly. "That's all we ever wanted." As the months rolled on, more veterans joined. Some stayed for a few weeks, some for months. A few never left. They became mentors for new arrivals. The place had transformed into a living, breathing family, a place where no one had to pretend to be fine when they weren't. One evening, after everyone had gone inside, he sat outside with Shadow lying beside him. The air was cool, filled with the sounds of crickets and distant laughter from the barn. He leaned back against the wooden fence and stared at the stars. "I wish you could see this, Rex," he murmured. "We made something out of the mess. You'd like it here." Shadow lifted his head at the sound of his voice and nudged his hand gently. He smiled, rubbing the dog's ears. "Yeah, I know. You're doing a good job carrying the torch." Suddenly, a distant flash of headlights caught his attention. A car was approaching slowly down the dirt road. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes people came late to drop off donations or ask about adopting. But as the car got closer, he noticed the faint blue and red reflections bouncing off the trees. Police. His stomach tightened for a brief second, not out of fear, but out of memory. He stood up as the car parked near the entrance. Two officers stepped out, one older, one young. They looked calm, respectful. The older one spoke first. "Evening," he said. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. We're just following up on some community partnerships. Heard a lot of good things about this place." He nodded politely. "You're welcome here. Come have a look around." As they walked together, the younger officer's eyes landed on the memorial plaque for Rex. He paused to read it quietly. "Was that your dog?" he asked softly. He took a slow breath. "Yes," he said. "He's the reason this place exists." The young officer looked down, visibly moved. "I'm sorry for what happened. I've heard the story from people in town. It wasn't right." He gave a small nod, his voice calm. "It's in the past now. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what grows from it." The officer nodded. "That's a good way to look at it. Most people would have turned bitter." "Bitterness doesn't build anything," he replied simply. The officers stayed for a while, talking to the veterans, watching the dogs train. Before they left, the older one turned to him and said, "If you ever need a hand with anything, transport, safety checks, community events, call us. We'd like to support you however we can." He thanked them, and after they left, he stood there for a long moment, watching the flashing lights fade down the road. For the first time, seeing those lights didn't bring back pain. It brought peace. The following weeks were some of the best the project had seen. They started hosting open days for local families, where children could come play with the dogs and learn about respect, kindness, and service. The laughter of children filled the air, mixing with the barking and the clinking of food bowls. The veterans found themselves smiling more than they had in years. One of them, a quiet man who rarely spoke, sat next to him one afternoon. "You know," the man said, "I used to think I'd never find peace again. But when that little kid hugged my dog today, I felt something I haven't felt in a long time. Like maybe I still belong somewhere." He looked at him with a faint smile. "You do," he said softly. "We all do. Sometimes it just takes the right place to remind us." Around that time, the organization that had visited earlier invited him to speak at a veterans conference. He hesitated at first. Public speaking wasn't something he enjoyed. But they insisted that hearing his story, the story of how pain turned into purpose, could help others start their own healing journeys. When he finally agreed, he didn't prepare a fancy speech. He just spoke from the heart. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of people, he told them about Rex, about the day everything changed, and about how he almost lost himself to grief. Then he told them about the barn, the first group of veterans, and how dogs who were once broken helped humans who were the same. He ended with simple words. "We all carry something heavy, but healing doesn't come from forgetting, it comes from building, and sometimes it starts with a single act of kindness." When he stepped off stage, the applause followed him like a wave. People came up to shake his hand, some with tears in their eyes. He didn't see himself as a hero, just a man doing what needed to be done. But that night, as he drove back home, he felt something shift inside him. Maybe in his own quiet way, he was finally at peace. Back at the project, the veterans greeted him with cheers when he arrived. Someone had prepared a surprise, a wooden plaque for the entrance gate. It read, "Home of the Second Chance Project, where healing finds a home." He ran his fingers across the carved letters, his throat tightening. "This place belongs to all of us," he said softly. That night, there was a small bonfire by the oak tree. Everyone gathered around it, veterans, volunteers, dogs lying at their feet. They shared stories, roasted food, and laughed under the open sky. The firelight danced on their faces, turning every scar and wrinkle into something beautiful. He sat quietly watching them, feeling proud, not just of what had been built, but of what had been restored.